Cool. Well, I am so excited to be here today with you, Hailey Piper, an incredible writer of all things horror fiction. But most recently, you are publishing your novel, A Light Most Hateful. Which number novel is it, by the way? I feel like
This is my 10th book.
and you had a how many books came out this year for you?
This is the third.
Like
It's
so
a
cool.
it's a lot, and I have four coming out next year.
You
And
do. I was like, Haley, you're working too hard. All of us, like
I
writers and creatives,
honestly,
have a
I'm a little
disease. We have
stressed about it, to be perfectly honest. I love writing. I love writing so much, and I just like I can't stop. So
darn, we have to read more of your words. Darn it. Well, okay. So, A Light Most Hateful, I want to hear where this particular idea came from because what I love about your work is you jump all over the place. Like, you've got cosmic horror, you've got horror westerns. This is like cosmic horror, female friendship, coming of age. And I love the way that you're just like, I will write whatever I want and I don't care about adhering to a subgenre. And so, I want to hear where A Light Most Hateful came from for you.
honestly, it started so long ago. It's hard to remember
Mm.
specifically. I've been trying to make this story work for like years and years.
Oh,
I
really?
think it started with something completely different. It started with something much more typical. Like it was like something about a girl who didn't know what was going on all the time, who was trying to stop like a tentacle thing from killing a baby. It was like a short story. It was so random. And like that character became Sunflower, who has nothing to do with the sunflower in this book, but it was just kind of one of those little like stepping stones things.
Yeah.
Like there used to be different main characters, different like the what's
Um,
funny is like the original draft, the point where like everything goes nuts within like two chapters of the start of the book, that used to be like the ending of a previous version. And then that wasn't working. So I started a different version. It was like the middle. And then finally with this version that I wrote this one in 2020, like the first draft. And it was just like, let's just start there. Let's just start there. Like you know what, because the thing to me is people are always like, oh, well, you need to do a bunch of build up, get people to know the characters and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, you get to know the characters, who they really are, by putting them through a bunch of shit. So just start putting them through a bunch of shit right off the bat. Like you'll see who they are through those actions. Like, action is character. You'll see who they are through what they do. And they're going to change as things happen in the story.
yeah.
Especially one like this where all kinds of like, you know, the situation changes so much as they're going. Like within a few chapters, like Olivia is, dealing with her usual problems. And then like with some new developments for her regular life. And then there's a storm and a monster, and the people of the town are all suddenly violent and like out of their minds, and it's just like one thing after another. And it's like her reactions say who she is. You don't need 100 pages of her just going about her regular life before something finally happens in the book.
Well, I was actually was excited to talk about that because I was reading it and I was like, oh, we are just getting right into the action. We are not gonna have like her at home. And I love that though, because I think I love a good slow burn, but I also love when like writers are like, I trust my audience to kind of follow along and be able
And
to like it's a trust, and I feel like it is a trust thing of being like my audience can handle me jumping into the action and following me along on the journey. And I love that because I feel like people don't give readers a lot of credit. And, I think you do with this, especially
I
jumping right in. Yeah.
thank you, because like that is my thing. Is like I'm like, people are smart. They can handle things. They can, and the nice thing with the book is the author doesn't control time. You do as a reader. So if
Yeah.
like, and I've had this like, especially with books that I love, I've had to go back over paragraphs. Like, did I get that right? And it's like people can take the moment to do that. Like especially like what was I reading? Looking Glass Sound by Catcher on a Ward. There are a couple points where I had to go back a little, and it's like, all right, let me make sure I got this straight because this is
Yeah.
very complicated. And in a book like this where there's so much happening later to stack on a bunch of things at the beginning, I feel that aren't necessary just to kind of like, let you, I don't know, let the bath temperature rise, I guess.
Yeah.
Just doesn't feel necessary. It honestly feels like it's just it's going to stress the structure of the entire story to me.
Yeah.
Because what the what is the middle of this book might be, could be like something you could look at as like, oh, that's must be the climax. It's like, nope, there's way more. There's more stuff to happen. It's just gonna keep escalating. So
Well, and I
it's
love
just to
that because
me,
everything just keeps
it's
escalating. And I love
right.
when people just
And
take it, like keep going, like, oh no, we're going past the point of most things. We're gonna go like even crazier than you're used to. And I love
right.
that.
And to me, my thinking is if we start off with 100 pages of stuff, like and I love a slow burn too, but
Yeah.
it's got to be for the right story. And to me, for
Yeah.
this particular story, I feel like 100 pages of kind of like settling in, and then suddenly things are taking off like a rocket. Like I feel like that would be more jarring than just how it's just starts with the
Yeah.
way it is now.
Yeah. Well, I really love the character in this book that you have called Christmas. I love Christmas. They are just a weird, sassy little creature, and I love them so much. And so I wanted to hear about developing their character and if there was any specific inspiration. And also, since you've talked about all the iterations, when did Christmas, what iteration and draft did Christmas appear for you?
Christmas appeared in the second version where like everything goes nuts around the middle of the story. So
Okay.
they appeared like shortly before that point in
Okay.
like that version of it. Which is kind of how they are in here. They appear just before everything starts to fall apart. Almost like a harbinger. And that's kind of what their use was, that what their function was in that story is kind of like this sign of weirdness that comes out of nowhere that was also like really self-confident, like way overconfident in their ability, which they never really demonstrate. um, um, I'm not sure what the inspiration for Christmas was. I was just sometimes it's just like a character just kind of walks into your head and you're like, oh, this is a neat person. I hope I find something. It was funny, like this year I had a trio of characters pop up for a story I was working on, and the story fell apart. But I was like, well, these three are interesting. I want to keep them, and I kept trying to stick them to things, and it wouldn't work. And finally, I got something like this summer that I was like, okay, this is it. But like things like that happened, so Christmas was always part of this, but it's just one of those things where a character just kind of pops in your head and you figure them out as you're writing them. Like I think originally Christmas was going to have kind of a not villainous, but definitely less of like on the side of the protagonists type of situation, but it just wasn't making sense for how Christmas saw themselves. Like it that didn't make sense to me. Like they act like somebody who doesn't care. And like that's one of those things with characters who act like they don't care. They care so much.
I know. I love them as like a character that's like, I am an emo like teenager. I'm not gonna care. Just kidding. I love you. I don't know. Like I know that's like a very reductive reading, but I love
No,
characters
I
like
get like
that.
it's like what am I trying to think of? Geralt from The Witcher is one of those characters who acts like he doesn't give
Yes.
a damn, but he really cares. Like I love characters like that.
Yes, I love them. So, moving on like from characters to action. I love how you write action, especially in the beginning when we meet one of our first big monsters and we're at a drive-in movie theater and it's just this like really cool moment, and from there on everything is just a lot of crazy action. And I was curious, I'm always so curious about how writers approach writing action and if you have like a special approach or kind of how you write your action pieces.
I do, but I'm probably gonna, if then other writers who hear me say this, they might get mad. Um, because I've noticed that some writers, they kind of like, and there's nothing wrong with this, it just doesn't click with me. Where like, I'm describing a movie in my head. And to me, watching a movie is a very different experience from reading a book. And so, like, describing action as if I'm watching it happening does not make me feel the action. And that's the really important part for me.
Wow.
I have to feel myself in the skin of whatever character's point of view the scene is. And this whole book takes place from pretty much from Olivia's point of view.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a matter of not just describing what's happening, but like how does it feel? How does it smell? How does it sound? Like how does it taste if that's relevant?
Yeah.
Not just what you see. And figuring out what the beats of it are. And not like there's a special rule to that, but just like you don't want to hurry too much through any particular moment because then you don't get to feel it. Like that's at least for me when I'm writing that
Yeah.
stuff. I want, because I was, and as I'm just going to contradict myself, I was like, writers don't have a control of time. It's like, but we can pretend we do because if we want something to happen quickly, we barely describe it. And if we want it to happen slowly, we describe it in detail. So
Yeah.
like when I'm not going to spoil it, but a certain character gets killed in one of the early chapters. Um, you know, when the actual beginning of that altercation happens, it's very quick, but the details of it are described much more in depth because that's what Olivia is seeing. That's what she's and the feeling that she's having from seeing that, hopefully is reaching into the reader.
That's and like as like an extension of that, I also love how you make monsters in all of your books, but I also would just love to hear about like I mean, is it just as easy as monsters popping up into your head? I mean, because I know that sometimes you just have ideas of monsters, but I'm
Right.
just curious about like
It
what developing monsters is like for
it
you.
depends because to me a monster is not just an appearance. It's
Yeah.
the appearance is a function of the monster. So that's like, you start with what it is and then you branch out from there into physicality if it even has one. Sometimes some monsters don't.
Mhm.
Um like but I think motivation is important. Why is this happening? Like that's really one of the biggest things with my monsters. And usually, and like one of my core things with writing is empathy. So I'm like, I want to, even if I don't like the monster or agree with the monster or whatever, I do want to understand the monster, even if the characters
Yeah.
don't, even if the reader doesn't. It's important that if you're looking, you can see why this is happening. Like the Worminous Kings, for example, the Gray Maiden, like he was like, oh, it's so cool. There's like this 10, 12-foot bird monster in a big like ring wraith cloak and stuff. And it's like, but why is that happening? It's like, well, because she's the last of her kind as far as like from the way she sees things. And is essentially been taken in by the only people who would, and they're using her for things that she probably wouldn't naturally do in her timeline of you know not to get mixy with that, or Benny Rose, which I don't want to spoil the ending of Benny Rose, even though it's like 3.5 years old at this point, but like when you find out the truth near the end, like it makes sense why this thing is doing this. It's not a good
Yeah.
reason, but you still understand why it's happening.
Yeah. Cool. That's amazing. And so, do you have a favorite monster you've ever? I know it's like telling you
Oh
to like
God.
pick your favorite children, so you don't have to. But like, do you have a creation that you're particularly proud of in
Oh,
your
that's a
works?
good question though. So probably probably still Magenta from Queen of Teeth. I just love her. She's so funny and interesting and interested in things. Like she's curious about things. She's got a big heart. Um, and yet she's still violent and destructive and eats people and um yeah. So I
And
think
like that's like why I love your characters because like they're monstrous, but they're also empathetic. Like you said, empathy, and I think that's just like such a big marker. And I think that there's been such a shift recent. And I've really gotten into like horror lit very recently, so I'm not as updated on like trends and everything. But I feel like there's so much more empathy and a lot of horror lit now. Not that it's I don't know if that's correct, but there's just so much more cool things happening with how we're playing with characters and like in A Light Most Hateful, like feminine rage. And I think just because I think there's because so many more voices, and maybe it's because I'm reading way more voices too, like maybe that is also why, but I don't
Well,
know, but it's
you're gonna see things in what you do. So if you're reading broadly, you're gonna get a bigger experience.
yeah,
Somebody who's reading very narrowly isn't going to see as much. So it's not like
yeah,
it's not so you're reading broadly, then you are seeing what's happening. Someone who's reading narrowly is like they're like, oh, I can't find, like I've seen that before. People are just like, I can't find any books like this. I guess they don't exist. And
like
you'll see a bunch of
I
people
probably
chime
do.
in and agree. And it's like, whatever you're thinking of, there's probably something like it. And that's not saying don't create it, but don't be ignorant about it either.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I do see that too. And I think I think there's kind of a, I don't know. I'm trying to think of older horror books I've read. I feel empathy is a thing, but it's kind of it was still a thing, but it depended on who was writing it, depended on the book.
yeah, that's
Like
true.
and it also depends on what kind of story has been told on about that particular literature in because
Hmm.
the reputation a book gets is not necessarily representative of what the book is.
Yes, that's
Like
so important.
especially if it's been adapted to film or has become a keystone of like horror culture or whatever, like Frankenstein, for example, um, is probably the best example. I mean, the book itself is very empathetic to the
Yeah,
monster. Whereas you get to I think the movie was doing the best, like the James Whale movie, it was doing the best it could for its time, but because of this kind of the simplicity necessitated, you could only show as so much with the monster, as far as like what would
yeah,
garner empathy. And like King Kong was like completely accidental. They did not mean for people to feel sorry for King Kong when they were making the movie, but it happened anyway.
yeah,
Just as examples. But like
yeah,
Frankenstein is one of those things where it's like you will have versions that are very tragic. You'll have versions that are very empathetic. You also have versions that are very just violent and simplistic and stuff.
yeah. Well, so I earlier I mentioned about how much I love that you kind of just you say I don't care about labels, and I see like subgenres clashing, and not clashing. You're bringing together different subgenres so well in all of your writing. So I'm curious, do you have
It's
a
a
certain
soup.
philosophy? It's a beautiful, delicious soup, and it is almost soup season, everybody. Well, in my heart, it's always soup season. But do you have a certain like philosophy when it comes to creating your own personal brand of horror?
um, it's complicated. Um, for genre itself, I kind of go to what Gabino Iglesias has said before, is that genre is for bookstores. Um,
I
it's for
love that
category.
quote.
I'm probably it's probably worded better than that, but I'm paraphrasing. But yeah, it's for marketing. It's
Yep.
books are books, stories are stories. We kind of draw these lines because I mean, on a cynical level, you could say it's for sales, but I think on a general level, it's because people have things they like and they try to find more of the things they like. And we group and humans as a species, we tend to categorize things. We do the best we can to figure it out. I think that gets troublesome when somebody's like, well, I like this, but I don't like that. And it's like you are walling off an entire version of experiences because what's a good example? People said I don't like cosmic horror. And like you can really what that means is you haven't liked the cosmic horror that you've read so far. That doesn't mean you wouldn't like cosmic horror, but there are people who are just like when they're reading something and they realize, oh, this is cosmic horror. I don't like cosmic horror, therefore I no longer like this thing that I was enjoying up until this point. And that's where genre and subgenre stuff, those labels start to get dangerous. And you can apply that
Yeah.
to anything really, um, where someone's fine with something up until it's got like this preconceived notion to them. And it's like, it's almost like, it's almost like applying what you interact with as part of who you are. And I think that can get dangerous.
Oh
But
yeah.
also, but on a less serious note, it also is just cutting you off from stuff that you might actually like quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I don't really have a philosophy of that. It's just the story is the story, and then we figure out what the subgenre is after the fact. For horror itself, that's also kind of a reverse engineering thing. I have characters and storylines and things that kind of just end up, how do I put this? It's like chemical bonds. They kind of start to, like, I start to notice things that, like, oh, this could work too. Like what I was mentioning earlier with the three characters I came up with earlier this year, and I couldn't get them to stick to something until finally it was like I had a concept I was working on. I was like, this is it. This is their story. And it turned out to be right. And that was just what they needed. But it's not like I came up with them for that story. And I forget that later. And then, like, in an interview in like 5 years, it could be like, oh yeah, they were always part of that, because I don't remember differently. But although I probably will not have this conversation about it. But yeah, just like, different elements kind of just float. Like I try to write down every idea I have, every piece of dialogue. Um, Even if it doesn't have anything to do with the story I'm working on, I put it in a note file, and I'll often go just scrolling through the notes and see, like, if I'm working on something, and I'm like, all right, I'm trying to think of something. I'm trying to think of this character is not well developed enough. Is there anything I've come up with in the past that would click with them? And I'll scroll through my stuff and I'm like, yeah, that's a good element. It'll usually twist a little bit. It won't be exactly like copy paste. Okay, done. But like, it'll just kind of like it again, it's like chemical bonds. It starts to create a new thing, a new molecule, or whatever. How I'm not a chemistry person, so I probably shouldn't be using that analogy, but that's
Sounds
what
right to
makes
me,
sense to
but
me.
yeah.
So as far as like a philosophy for horror, it's kind of, again, it ends up being this reverse engineering thing. It's like, okay, I have the story, I've got the characters, I've got what I'm making, and it's kind of just a question of, is it the best version of itself? Is it all of itself? And but I do notice, so any patterns that are very much like my brand of horror are kind of things I notice after the fact. Um,
Okay, cool.
like I want it to be weird, I want it to be empathetic, and usually that happens. I want it to be queer. And the funny thing with that, people probably like, okay, so she decided this character's gay. It's like, no, I end up feeling what they are, as I'm writing them. Otherwise I wouldn't write any straight characters. If I felt it was up to me, then that'd just be what I do, but it's not. It the characters kind of, it's a lot of feeling it out.
That's amazing. Ugh. It's like, so it like makes me want to start writing more too, just like thinking about that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. That's so cool. So before I wrap up, I have one last question for you. And
Good.
are there any books, horror or otherwise, that people need to be checking out and should be reading this Halloween season? Besides your own, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, A Light Most Hateful, like, if you've heard of it.
um,
um One that I really enjoyed earlier this year was Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson.
about to
It's
start reading it. I'm
Oh,
so
cool. Yes,
excited.
it is. It's very spicy. It's also
Love
very like,
spice.
it's one of those things where it's like nothing bad is happening like on screen, but you feel like off screen something bad is happening. If you just could turn your head a little bit, you'd see it. And it's just that constant feeling of, I'm really enjoying myself. Why do I have this nagging bad feeling the whole time? It's like one of those kinds of stories.
Ooh, very exciting. Love that.
Shoot, there was another one. I just read it and I can't remember, and that sucks. Shoot. I'm gonna remember it after this and be so annoyed with myself. I feel like it was an arc, so it might have been for next year, actually.
Okay. Well, you probably also
um,
read so much
I
when you can,
do, but when
between writing.
well, I mean, for me, reading is necessary for writing. I try
Yeah,
to read every night. It's just
cool.
it's not always new stuff, and it's not always, or it's too new. Like I get
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
arcs, so I
yeah.
end up reading way in advance. And so, like, what was it? Like Looking Glass Sound, for example, I mentioned earlier, which is also really good. I love Catch Your Own Awards books. That I think I read last December, I think. So it's not like a recent book to me.
Books
And
are wild. I'm like a screener like a week before a movie comes out, but an arc you get it like 6 months, and I'm like, oh my God, how do you
I
plan?
know. Um, I'm listening to the audiobook for All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. And I know technically like the way they put that in the book, again, the bookstore is it's a crime novel, and it is, but it's also a horror novel, to be honest. Like it
Crime
like
and
the
horror to me go hand in hand because
right.
crime books usually scare me even more than
Yeah.
horror books, but that's me because
And
I'm
that's
whatever.
it's definitely that kind of book because like by chapter two, your heart is racing because something bad is happening. And I just like I'm past the middle and I'm not going to get specific, but there's a chapter where it seems very innocuous. Like it seems like okay, this is kind of just the drudgery of what the character needs to be doing right now. And then this other character who hasn't shown up before is kind of just wanders into the scene a little bit and it like the tone changes on a dime. Like I was like it felt like this a scene from The Ring, like in the middle of this crime novel. And
Ooh,
I was just like,
okay.
I like, sometimes a character will just say a line and you just have these bad vibes just rain down over you. And you
All of a
know
sudden
that
your
every
stomach feels
right,
sour and you're like,
right.
oh
And
no.
it's just like it's one of those moments where you're just like, nothing that this character is going to say after this is going to be anything good. And I know it's going to keep the story going, but it's all bad news. This is all going to be bad news. Even if this character never shows up, I have no idea because I'm only in the middle of the book. But like, if this character never shows up again, then she is just coming in, dropping this horrible like this evil gift onto the book, and then walking away. And I was just like, oh my god. So
That's
like that's
incredible.
yes, so that All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. I'm sure most people are reading that book anyway, but they should definitely be reading it. They've been like, oh, I'm not into crime. I just like heart. Read this book.
Amazing. Well, Hailey, thank you so much for sharing everything about your process and A Light Most Hateful, which is out on October 10th,
10.
everybody. Get excited.
So and
Also, just real
yeah.
quick, can you plug all the other books coming out that
Oh
you can
my
talk about
God.
that have dates for next year too, so everyone can keep an eye out on your
They
amazing schedule of
okay, so
releases.
they don't have most of them don't have release dates yet. They have release like areas.
Fall
Like
2024.
yeah, well, that one actually does have a release date, the autumn
Okay,
one.
cool. Oh.
Like there's one coming out each quarter. Um,
Oh, cool.
so
Look at
so
you.
Cranberry
That's Hailey
Cove
Piper.
is a supernatural crime novella that's coming out from Bad Hand Books in first quarter 2024. Um,
Cool.
I think the last of the Worm and His Kings books, Song of the Tyrant Worm, will be coming out in I believe April. We haven't narrowed down the exact day, but it'll be coming out in April next year.
Amazing.
Um, the Ghostlands of Natalie Glasgow is a collection that takes the original Possession of Natalie Glasgow book and that and like six other interconnected stories. So it's all stories of these characters. And that's coming out from Rooster Public in summer, but they're doing like limited edition hardcover pre-orders right now. And I think those will ship sooner than summer. Um,
Cool.
and then the one that does have a release date, October 15th, 2024, is my vampire novel, All the Hearts You Eat. And that is my next book from Titan Books. It is very weird, very bloody, very sexy. It's also my largest novel, which I did not think was going to happen because I thought my fantasy novel was going to be my largest, but this one squeaked just a little past that in length.
I'm so excited for all of those books. Hailey, thank you so much for chatting with me today. And
Thank you for
everyone, like I
having
said,
me.
October 10th, A Light Most Hateful, everybody, wherever you find your books, either digital or print.